Hello everyone. Now we move to the 11th round in the Tata Steel Masters Tournament of 2024. And now we look at a game between Wei Yi and Max Warmerdam. They played a very sharp line in the bishop's opening. We have e4, e5, bishop c4 and knight f6, d3 and bishop c5, knight c3, c6 and f4. Very aggressive indeed. d5, a principled idea. White has started a flank attack, so we respond in the center. He takes d5 and knight g4, knight f3. And it's important not to play knight f2 immediately because black's king is still in the center. If knight f2, then queen e2. And you grab the rook, you lose this pawn, we check. Queen e7 and knight e4. Now, if let's say you trade here, and after f takes and you play c takes and bishop e7, there's bishop e3. White can castle queenside and pick up that knight later, and the pieces are very well placed, and white has two pawns and will have a knight in exchange for a rook. White is doing very happy there. So after let's say knight e4, you have c takes, d5, bishop takes and bishop b6. You give up the g7 pawn. Rook f8 and queen c3, hitting that bishop. Knight a6 and king f1. This is perfectly fine for white. In fact, white is much better. So after knight f3, simply castles. F takes e5, knight f2 now is fine. Queen e2 and knight takes h1. Bishop g5, developing and attacking. Queen to a5 and d6, securing that pawn and creating a passed pawn. Bishop g4, bishop e7, attacking the rook and cementing that pawn and the bishop there. Knight to d7, you should develop and not worry about that material because you've already grabbed a rook. e6, very interesting, just trying to bust open the king side. And it's important to note white hasn't castled himself. And bishop a3, a very interesting response. We're exploiting the fact that the knight on c3 would be vulnerable if that b pawn were to move. So e takes f7 first, king h8, and castles. We defend the b pawn, and black grabs the knight because now the b pawn is pinned, and b takes a3. There are a couple of ideas here. What if we just grab on a3 first? If queen takes a3, king b1 and queen b4, there's bishop b3 here. White is okay here, so you can grab this pawn on f7 with rook takes f7, and then you give up that knight, which was lost anyway. Let's say bishop takes f3 and g takes f3 and a5, there's queen e4. So you can exchange queens, but that will strengthen the pawn structure for white, and ultimately the two bishops will prove to be very strong because they're so well placed. You could try this rook into f3 and give up the exchange, give back the exchange, and queen takes and a4. Queen e4, queen takes, d takes, a takes, and c takes. And white is up a pawn and has a pawn on d6, so this line is not very favorable for black. There was an idea here to play a5 first, not go with b5 immediately because the bishop can run to e6. Give the exchange, and after king b1 you play queen f6, secure the e6 square so that the bishop cannot escape, and now b5 and a4 are quite strong threats. You'll have to play d4, and after b5 bishop d3. White's pawns are split, the queen side pawns are shattered, so there would be some chances against the white king here, and black can play on. It's perfectly fine for both sides. Eventually that knight on h1 would be grabbed, but that's fine. So will white's pawns be grabbed. And it's important after king b1, we don't go to b5 immediately because then bishop e6. And it's not as good. We want to keep little more pieces on the board and just keep some pressure. That was one play, but after bishop takes e3, bishop into f3 was played, and this means that the e6 square is free for the white bishop. G takes, and now you could grab on a3, but it doesn't help as we've seen before. Knight e5 was tried, But now the queen really can't move too many squares because it has to keep an eye on the e5 knight now. King b1 simply, queen d4. Where does the queen go? You can't grab on a3. So if you try rook into f7, for instance, you can have bishop into f7 and knight into f7, d7. Very strong and very, very good for white. You could try to distract the white queen with knight f2 and queen takes f2, but queen e5, but then there's queen h4. And it's very strong for white indeed. So queen d4 was played, and finally white grabs that knight on h1. Knight takes c4, d takes c4, and queen b6. And king c1. We're keeping the possibility the king could come on the d file as well. Rook takes f7, finally getting out of the way, and rook d1, threatening to push d7. Rook f8, d7. It was also possible to just grab that rook. This is also fine. And play queen e7. And we're threatening to grab the rook. If the rook moves, we'll play d7 and then queen e8. So queen d8 would have to be played, and rook e1. Again, if you trade queens, you can just bring a rook to the 7th file and play d7 and threaten that way. So h6 would have to be played, and then d7 and move the king h7, so there's no queen into d8 and rook e8 threats. And f4. White is winning this as well. But anyway, d7 was played. We don't grab the rook immediately. Rook g8, queen e5, rook a d8, f4, c5, trying to maybe, well, you have to play something, and maybe the queen wants to swing to the king's side, perhaps. Bishop takes d8 and queen takes d8. That's taken care of, and queen takes c5. And there's nothing more for black to do, really, and black resigned here because white is up 3 pawns and there's a monster on d7, so that really takes care of everything. Eventually, black will have to suffer severe material loss, and a very nice victory for VE. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you soon for the next game.